Good morning, Remade. I apologize for the delay in the broadcast. It seems like Facebook is having some issues, and this is like countrywide, not just to us. We were actually doing some research trying to get it back up and running, and other churches are experiencing the same thing. So for those of you who were able to transition over to YouTube, we do stream here every week as well. That's where we archive our video footage. We do thank you for being patient. Get the word out. Share this with those that you know may not have caught on to what we were trying to let others know on Facebook. Not sure what's going on there, but and like I said, we do apologize for the interruption. Hopefully from here on we can at least continue with the broadcast. But I did want to welcome you. Thank you for joining us for our annual live stream only Sunday. Once a year, we have to vacate the children's home. They don't ask much of us as tenants, but they do ask once a year, the first full weekend in August, we do vacate so they could use the building for their annual homecoming for those that grew up in the children's home. They come back and they do a big weekend event. So that's why we're here. And for the last several years, we used to find other venues, but for the last several years, we've used this live stream format, and it seems to have worked fairly well, and so we've decided to stick it out for a while and see how that turns out for us. And we do live stream, for those who are not aware, we do live stream every Sunday. This is something that you can share to your friends, your family, those that are unable to attend us physically due to physical limitations or where they live. They can still join us through the internet. They can post in. We have people that comment and interact with us live during the sermon, and we do try to have someone there that can respond. This is something that we're trying to push and grow so that the social media can be used to expand our outreach. Last week, we began a two-part mini-series. It was a mini-series on the topic of faith, and we defined what faith was and kind of spoke to its value in our lives. And today we want to go a little deeper and see how faith actually affects us as people. How does it affect our lives personally? But before we want to begin, I want to do something a little interactive. If you have your small group with you, I know several of our small groups were able to come together and do this communally. So thank you for doing that. We really are pushing small groups here at Remade because we feel like that's the way that we can do the Acts 2 church to its fullest. It's one thing to just come and attend on a Sunday morning or just to volunteer, and those two things have their own impact in our lives. But when you take it up a notch and you join a small group, you really get to know church. Church becomes real to you. It becomes more family than it was prior. It becomes part of your DNA, and you're able to do ministry with other people. You grow spiritually, and you're able to support each other, have more avenues of ministry coming to you and flowing out of you than you would have otherwise. And so thanks for being a part of a small group. If you don't have one yet, contact Tiffany Grubbs. She's our small group coordinator here at Remade. She'd gladly find one that would fit you. Maybe you feel like, maybe I should start one. And it doesn't take a lot. We can teach you how to lead one. It's not as scary as it sounds. It's actually fairly easy. But this is my little plug for small groups. Now, that being said, if you're by yourself, if you're with a small group, go ahead and get a pen and paper out. I just want to do a quick warm-up exercise. It's a pop quiz, but there's no pass, there's no fail. It's just to get our brains flowing. It's to get us past this hump of the broadcasting error and just kind of get our minds thinking about faith. If you're with your small group, see who remembers the most. It's a pop quiz and a review of last week. If you want to, feel free to comment on our live stream. Let us know you're here and post your answers and then share it with other people. But hopefully by now you've had some time to grab something to write with or you can just do it in your head. But I got 4 questions. The first is, what was the illustration we used last week to demonstrate faith? More specifically, what was the historical story that was used to further the demonstration on faith? The second is, what was the verse last week that we said was the biblical definition of faith? What verse in the Bible defines faith? Number 3, all right, we did an alliteration, and which is each thing starts with the same letter. So with that, what were the 3 areas that we were to apply faith in our lives? Give you a hint, alliteration starting the same letter. It all started with F. There's the 3 F's that would show areas of our lives we could apply faith. And then last but not least, and this one's kind of a tough one, haha, what is the subject of this 2-week series? All right, that one should be easy because we've said it in all the last 3 questions. All right, hopefully you've had time to write this down or think it up. Here are the answers, and you'll see them about right here on the screen. The first, what was the illustration, the historical story? It's William Tell, the father that had to shoot an apple off his son's head, and I asked to see if anyone would be a volunteer to step up on stage and let me attempt that if you had faith in my abilities. Second, the verse from last week was Hebrews 11:1. That's the biblical definition of faith. Third, the 3 areas, the alliteration was family, future, and finances. And last, the subject of this 2-week series, well, hopefully you got it by now, it's faith. All right, like I said, this is just a warm-up. There wasn't a pass and fail, just something fun to kind of get the brain going, to knock out the cobwebs, to get the sleep out of your eyes. I know if you were like I would be if I wasn't here currently, you probably just rolled out of bed, grabbed a bite to eat, you're still in your pajamas, turned on the live stream. So that way your brain's going, you're thinking about it, your hearts are where it needs to be. But let's dive in, okay? So last week we talked about faith, and we said that it was crucial for the Christian life. We looked at Hebrews 11:6. You should see that on the screen. It says, now without faith it's impossible to please God. So we determined, based on Hebrews' bold statement, that faith was necessary in the Christian life. And we defined it, and we looked at, in a general sense, how it affects our lives. But today I want to take a chance and let's go a little deeper. Let's look at what faith can do when it's put in action in our lives. What are some of the results? And what we'll see in a few minutes is that faith is typically the catalyst for many great things which have happened throughout history and many great things that can happen in your future. Faith is the catalyst that makes it all possible. There are many people who are business starters. They're entrepreneurs, not necessarily Christ followers. There's some that don't believe in God, but there were leaps of faith that took their industry to the next level. For instance, social media. I know Facebook was having issues, but typically that's where we stream to. Mark Zuckerberg was a person who wanted to give college students the ability to interact with each other. And it was when social media was just being born, just becoming a thing that was mainstream. And so Facebook was created. He took a chance. He took a leap of faith. And now after several years of Facebook growing and evolving, we're able to do so much more than was ever thought possible. The church 30 years ago, you had to get a broadcast license and hope a TV station would carry you if you were big enough and had a big enough name if you wanted to broadcast to other people outside of your audience. Well, now we can all do it, and we can reach people that we would be unable to reach otherwise. And you look at Henry Ford creating the automobile. The list goes on. Many people took leaps of faith, but their leaps of faith and their inventions, their business interactions changed not only technology but human history. But they had to take a chance. They could have failed. We all know the story of Thomas Edison and how he had to continue to try. But now we have lights, electric lights that light up our houses because of he taking chances and risk and previous failures to get where we are now. You may have heard the statement, "O ye of little faith." It's actually comes from the Gospels, but it's kind of become mainstream enough that even non-Christians use it for different situations. That verbiage itself, "O ye of little faith," you can tell by the "ye" portion, is more of a traditional historical English writing style, but the meaning hasn't changed throughout time. Many times in the Gospels, Christ replied to his followers using that statement. You see, Christ in his whole earthly ministry, his thing was about faith and the power in God and who he was, showing mankind that he was God's son. He is God. He is God incarnate, so that they would understand the link, so that when he died, the salvation link would be completed, and they would understand that. But often was the case, the people didn't get it. They were a little dense. I mean, we are too. In hindsight's 2020, it's easy for us to look back at the disciples and see otherwise, but we as Christians today struggle with similar things. I can see him when he's having to say that, "O ye of little faith." I imagine him kind of shaking his head a little bit, looking down, and just sighing and be like, oh, ye of little faith, or come on, guys, where is your faith? In fact, one of the stories, Luke 8, it's not going to be on the verse, but if you look it up on your own, Luke 8, 22 through 25, it's the story Jesus was with his disciples, and he wanted to cross the Sea of Galilee, so he told them to, let's go ahead and get in a boat, and let's cross this sea, this body of water, to get to the other side. And while they were out, if you've ever been on High Rock Lake out on the ocean, you know, it's easy for a storm to roll up on you. Modern technology, yes, we can see the forecast. But if you didn't have forecast, what would look like a clear day could quickly turn into a storm. Well, there they are in the middle of the sea. Christ is taking a nap. Storm rolls up. And these are hardened fishermen. A lot of these disciples were fishermen by trade. And yet they were scared because this was a storm severe enough that they feared for their lives. So they woke up Christ and said, Master, Master, we're in trouble, we're sinking. And he shakes his head there and he's like, you have little faith. Like, come on, guys. Do you not understand who I am? And if the disciples had logically thought about it, this guy who's walked on water, who's healed people, brought the dead to life, his first miracle was turning water into another substance, wine. There's no alchemical reaction. He just miraculously changed one substance to another. That was his very first miracle. And they've seen these crazy things, and this guy is not even fazed. He's sleeping. And logically, you would say, well, I guess if he's cool with it and we're with him, we should be cool with it too. And like I said, hindsight's 20/20. But at the time, they were freaking out. And God's like, guys, you just don't have. Come on, have some faith. So he steps up and he says, "Be still." And immediately, the winds and the waves just die down, and it's peaceful again. And it says that the disciples marveled, and I don't understand. How can you continue to marvel when you've seen what he's done so far? But that's for a different time. But you see, faith has the power to make the earth itself move. If we have faith, God's promised us that ability. It's no secret by now. You can see by my T-shirt and the poster behind me. And in fact, my laptop itself. I do love Star Wars. It's an amazing saga. It's something I grew up on. It was something that kind of shaped my childhood. But most of us probably have heard of Star Wars, have seen some of it. It's so prevalent in pop culture. It's influenced pop culture in such a way that even if you don't realize it, you've been affected by the Star Wars franchise. I mean, the first film, A New Hope, came out in the late 70s, so they're pretty old, but they hold up very well. But in Empire Strikes Back, one of the early 80s movies, Luke, the Jedi Knight, the Jedi being those that have the power to tap into this cosmic power, the Force, and one of the abilities they have is they can move things with their mind kinetically. Well, he's trying to train because the Jedi are basically extinct. And so he flies to a swamp planet, a desolate planet, Dagobah, where Yoda, the last living Jedi Master, is. And he's looking to train there. Well, he crash lands his starfighter, his X-Wing, and so it's trashed. It's in the swamp, but it's still salvageable. Well, he's doing his training, and during the training, he watches as the starship, the X-Wing, sinks. It sinks, and now he's stuck. This is a desolate planet. There's no other living species with sentience. There's just a remote swamp planet, except for Yoda here. And so he's like, man, what do we do now? My X-Wing's at the bottom of the swamp. So Yoda's been teaching him to lift stones with the Force. He's like, now's a chance for you to reach out and put what you've learned into practice. And so it looks like, I guess I'll give it a shot. It's a starfighter. It's an X-Wing. It's different than lifting a stone the size of a baseball. I mean, that's heavy. This I can lift with my own hands. It makes sense. And so he says he'll try, and which initiates the famous phrase which Yoda says. He says, "Do or do not. There is no try." And basically he's saying, you're going to do it or you're not. There's no in between. Faith's kind of that way. So Luke was like, he shrugs it off. He's kind of that like, whatever, man, mentality. And he tries and he fails. And Yoda just sighs. I can see Christ there. He's like sighing like, oh, you have little faith. And so this is a time for Yoda to gently lecture his student. And so he sits there and he's this little, like less than 2 feet, like tiny little green alien compared to a human. And this little green old dude just reaches out his hand and he lifts up, closes his eyes and lifts up, and the fighter comes out of the water and it just floats over and sets down on dry land. And though that's science fiction, we as Christians can do similar things. And now I'm not preaching that we go out and we're going to have mystical power. I'm not saying that Christians have the ability to control things with their minds, to lift cars, to become modern Jedi. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that we have been promised with faith to do mighty things. You see, God said if we have faith the size of a mustard seed, just the smallest amount of faith, true faith, we can do crazy, impossible things. Matthew chapter 17, I want to tell you a little bit about it, and then we'll go to the key verse there. When Christ had his disciples, he would teach them, and occasionally he would send them out basically saying, I've taught you, now practice what you've learned. And so they had gone out and tried to do ministry on their own, and they had tried to cast out a demon. They've seen Christ cast out demons, and so they had attempted it themselves, and the demon just laughed at them basically and was like, who are you? No, I'm good, thanks man. I'm going to stay here. And so they come back to Christ frustrated, and they ask him, Lord, what did we do wrong? We did what you do, and the demon just didn't listen. You do it, and it works. What's the difference? And that's where we're going to pick up Matthew 17:20, Jesus' answer. It says, because of your little faith, he told them. For truly I tell you. So he replies, they said, why did it not happen? He says, because of your little faith. He says, for truly I tell you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will tell this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. You see, like in Star Wars, the disciples attempted to do something. They attempted to do a miracle. But like we said last week, it's the heart behind the action, the belief behind it, which gives it power. It's kind of like when you hear the story of a mother lifting a car off a child. We've all heard that tale. During normal circumstances, it is an impossibility. I'm fairly strong. And I can't lift a car. It usually takes these strongman competitions with these guys that can do impossible feats, and even they can't fully lift a car. They can do some crazy things, and they may be able to budge a car. But if we as weight training people, just normal humans, that's something that is impossible. But when faced with the need to perform because they're desperate, it's a dire need, these mothers, their bodies allow them to push past their physical limits and do something that is normally impossible. You see, it was the intent of their action that made all the difference. If they just walk up, try to lift it, yeah, it's impossible. It truly is. And you're like, and you come with that mindset. But when you're so desperate for the result, you push aside any logical thing that would hinder you. You push aside reason, and you go for intent, and you go for reaction, and you go to solve it. So this mother's like, I need to save my child. I don't care what it takes. And they do some crazy feats of superhuman strength. And see, that's what happens when we apply biblical principles to our lives. It empowers us to do amazing things. You see, God wants us to do the impossible. He wants us to. Because that furthers his will and it brings him glory. I mean, he is the Most High. He is sovereign king, the creator of the universe. He holds all existence in his hands. Of course he deserves glory because his very presence demands it. It's not that he's a tyrant, he's a bully. You just worship something so powerful and almighty. And see, faith improves our lives. Like I said, God wants to give us that power. So when we apply it, it improves it. One of the ways is that we get what we ask for from God. Faith gives us the power to directly ask the Almighty for things, and he responds favorably. You see, when we ask God, he's promised to grant us our request as long as we align with his will. You know, I could pray all day for a Ferrari, for a Lamborghini. One of you may say, hey, I got one in my garage. I know you don't, but you may and say, hey, Ben, you know what? I'm not using it. Here you go. You've been praying for it. Here's a Ferrari. And that'd be cool. Maybe God granted my wish, but maybe he didn't because he's not a genie. You see, Ferrari is probably not the best thing for me because I don't think I can afford the insurance on a Ferrari, the tax payments on a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. And I'm pretty sure I can't trust myself to be responsible on the road with that much power. I'm pretty sure I'd wreck it, kill myself, or get my license revoked and go to jail for excessive speeding. I mean, that's a lot of power, and I don't know if I'm ready for that. So God may not give me the Ferrari I'm praying for because that's a selfish desire. It doesn't further his kingdom, and it's not what's best for me. You see, if my daughter asks for ice cream for breakfast, I don't give her that. I want to give her something. If she asks me for an egg full of nutrients, sure, I'll give it to you. You want 2, 3, 6? If I need to go to the store and buy you more, sure, because it's good for you. Hey, Dad, I want some junk food and beer, and I'm 5 years old. Well, it's not. It's not because I don't love you, and it's not because I don't want to give you what you asked for. It's because that's not good for you, and that's how much I care. But when we're in God's will, when our lives fall into alignment with his will, then with faith, if we ask for it, he's promised to give it to us. Look at John 15, verse 7. It says, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you want and it will be done for you. That takes faith, guys, because it doesn't seem like it would be possible. But he says, if you're in my will and I am in you, I am influencing your life, ask it. I'll give it to you. That takes faith. But it's how people become prayer warriors. We all know someone who seems like they have a direct line with God. Whatever they ask for, God just seems to give it to them. They can just reach the heart of God. It's because they have faith and they're aligned with God's will. Another thing that faith can do for us, it helps combat fear. You know, have you ever been afraid? If you say no, then I would say you're lying because you're afraid of people knowing that you're afraid. We've all experienced fear at some point in our lives. I mean, fear can encompass many different things, have many different reasons for causing it. It could be fear of relationships, fear of finances going sour, fear of people finding out who you really are. The list could go on. Previous trauma could cause you to be afraid of certain situations. But what is it that causes us to lose our, what you would consider irrational fears as children when we become adults? Why are we not afraid of the monster under the bed anymore or the boogeyman in the corner? It's because we realize just because we can't see under the bed doesn't mean there's a monster there. And we realize that the boogeyman in the corner is nothing more than the coat rack. It's just the trick of the light based on the dim situation. It's adult logic that gets us through that. And that's where faith comes in. For the adult fears, faith is like the adult logic for a child's fear. Faith in God and his promises is what takes us from adult fears to biblical confidence. Over and over, the Bible tells people to stop being afraid. You know, fear is natural. I'm not saying it's wrong for natural fear. If a grizzly bear burst in right now, one, I'd be afraid because they're not native, and two, well, I'm right here stuck, tied down, reading to you, and if a grizzly bear is there, I'm probably going to die. That's natural fear. But when we succumb to it, especially fear that it's more than just life or death in a certain situation, but it's fear of the unknown, fear of the impossible, things like that. When we succumb to it, that's showing a lack of faith. Look at 2 Timothy 1:7. It says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but one of power, love, and of sound judgment. Fear is not trusting God. Fear is a lack of faith. And ultimately, what faith can do in our lives is it puts God in control. If you've ever flown in an airplane, let's get that right. If you've ever flown in an airplane, most of us just sit back and let the pilot do his job. Why? Because we're not pilots ourselves. Now, a couple of us may be, and if you are, then you're probably in the pilot seat, and so this is a different conversation. But if you're a passenger, you let the pilot do what he's trained to do. It's natural for us to relinquish control in some area of our lives because it makes sense. We want to preserve our lives. We know that if we try to fly the plane, we're going to kill ourselves and everybody else. But it's actually a daily struggle that most of us deal with, releasing control. We all like to be in control of our lives. You hear it, be in control of your own destiny. Why is it that it's easier to be a driver than it is to be a passenger with somebody else? It's because if you're the driver, you feel like you're in control. If you're in a passenger, it's up to that driver to keep you safe. And it freaks a lot of us out. But I'm talking more than just vehicular fear. You see, even my 5-year-old daughter deals with this. She's learning to become independent. My beautiful daughter, Alex, she's probably watching live. Hey, baby, I love you. I'm talking about you. Look, my 5-year-old daughter loves to be independent, and that's a God-given instinct because she's learning to be an adult. She's learning to do things on her own, and it's a good thing because we all had to learn that. We had to learn to function on our own. But the problem is when the fear for her lack of control fights with her trust in me, her desire to be independent, and the fear of losing control in that fights with her trust and ability to understand me, that's when we have many disasters. There was one time recently, we were coming home from a road trip, and Ashley was driving at that point, and we had just got some ice cream, and I looked back, and Alex had fallen asleep in her booster seat, and her ice cream was mostly eaten, but there's a little bit of melted ice cream in her bowl. And you know, when kids fall asleep, they start to lose control of things. Well, the bowl was starting to tip, and so I didn't want ice cream to spill. She was asleep. And so I gently reached up and took the ice cream out of her hands. Well, that movement startled her awake. And then at that moment, she sees that ice cream that was in her control leaving her hands. And she's not understanding the situation, and so she panics. She feels like she's losing control, and she reaches out and grabs the ice cream and tries to jerk it back, tries to take it back under her control, which results in ice cream going all over the car. And see, that's cute. That's cute to see a little 5-year-old trying to figure out life. But the problem is we do that on a daily basis with our spiritual lives. We try to take back control from God because we're afraid. We're afraid of what it means when he controls it. What it means we might have to give up. You see, if God controls our lives, it does mean that we can move mountains. And we haven't put two and two together. But faith being applied will. He wants to control it because he can do the impossible through us. We were created as his workmanship to do good works. He designed us for a purpose, for a reason. But we have to have faith in his abilities to give him control. Like I said last week, faith can be related to faith being the same as releasing control. If you were to step up on stage, like I said last week, and allow me to try to shoot an apple off your head with a bow and arrow, you are relinquishing control of your ability to keep yourself safe and trusting in my ability to keep you safe. And that's where faith in our spiritual lives comes into play. We have to look at God. It's scary, guys. There's some things that feels like based on the sense of the common man, of the worldview that we're used to, it doesn't make sense. Tithing doesn't make sense. Why would a normal person give 10% of their income? That's ridiculous. Taking somebody in off the street and nurturing back to health is something that only like Mother Teresa's do, the best among us. We as normal humans feel like that's just not the norm. Like that's out of control. But yet God wants to have control over life so that he can do some crazy, impossible things. But this brings us to the final thing. It's a difficult question. What if it doesn't work? What if you believe in something really strongly? You pray for it and it doesn't seem to happen. What then? What with all these biblical claims of with faith it's possible? Ask God, he'll give it to you. But what if you have asked and he hasn't given it to you? You know, what if you prayed for somebody to get better? You prayed believing. You prayed with all your heart because you were so desperate for them and they didn't. You think, I have to rely on the Bible. Once again, this is an act of faith because it says that his ways are higher than ours and his thoughts are higher than ours. We, as mortal humans, currently see like we're looking in a mirror dimly. We only see part of the reflection. We can only understand in part. It's like when I look at Alex. If she asks me for ice cream, all she understands is ice cream tastes good. I love ice cream right now. I'm hungry for breakfast. Can I have ice cream? But see, me as an adult, my thought process is more mature than hers. So I can see the need for nutrition. And that just an ice cream bar is not a nutritional need. So me as an adult who loves my daughter and wants her to grow up healthy overrides her desire for ice cream to give her nutrition. And so sometimes what we ask for is because we're not asking. Maybe God's given it to us, we just don't understand his answer. But see, that's why it's called faith. Because without risk of failure, there's no need for faith. If it's guaranteed, if it's absolute, it doesn't require faith. I told you last week, we use the example of sitting in a chair as an act of faith, but really it's more of a guarantee. 9 times out of 10, if we sit in a chair, it's going to hold us. We've come to terms with that. We understand it, so we sit down, and we don't even have to have faith anymore. It's just guaranteed. It's a guarantee that when we breathe, we're going to continue doing it. We don't have to think to ourselves, do I need to keep breathing? Do I need to keep breathing? Is my heart pumping? We allow our bodies to take control of that. But it's when there's a risk, when there's a chance for failure, that's when faith is required. It's kind of like why God gave man free will. Because if man chooses to love God, it's true love. If man was programmed to serve God and love him, it's not love, it's just instinct. It's just a programmed response to a stimuli. But yet we as humans have been given the will to reject God. He loves us so much. He desperately wants. He says he doesn't want anybody to perish, but all to come redemption. That's his heart's desire. But for it to be true love, because he wants us to truly love him, because he truly loves us, then we have to have the ability to say no. And the same goes with faith. If we need to have faith, there has to be ability for it to not work. I look at the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's found in Daniel. And see, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the Babylonian Empire had conquered Israel, and they had taken many young men with them because they're hoping to indoctrinate them into their culture so that they could kind of merge the two societies together so that the conquerors become one solidified empire instead of it being the conquerors and the conquered. So Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel were four young men who found favor with King Nebuchadnezzar. Well, after a while, Nebuchadnezzar kind of felt good about himself. And so he's like, you know what? I deserve some praise and worship more than I'm getting. So he creates an image, and he wants everybody to worship it. He's kind of feeling great about himself, kind of high and mighty. And he says, if you don't, you'll die. I'll throw you in a burning furnace. But it should be easy. All you got to do is, I'm going to have a ceremony. We're going to unveil this giant statue. And when the music plays, just bow down and show it reverence. That's all you got to do. Because he knows if he's standing there and he's looking over his empire and all his subjects are there and the music starts playing and as one they just bow down and it's like a wave rippling through the audience, that's going to feel good on his part. It's going to feel like he's getting that glory even though he's forcing it. But he's going to feel good. See, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were God followers. They believed in God. And they knew they couldn't bow down and worship any other thing. And so the time came, and everybody bowed down but them, and they were pointed out to King Nebuchadnezzar. So he brought them up, and he gave them a second chance. Look, guys, maybe you just didn't understand me. This is what happens when this is your cue. You just bow. That's all you got to do. Just bow. Just make a show of it, all right? Cool? They didn't. So he's infuriated. He not only has a fiery furnace, but he makes it hotter than it ever should be because he just wants them to suffer. He's so mad he's going to take out his vengeance on them. And he's like, ha ha, you said you're not going to worship me? Well, where's your God now, dude? I'm going to kill you. You're getting ready to go in a fire. See, I am supreme. You're not. Who's your God now? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, their response is beautiful. Look at Daniel chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. It reads, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. He had asked, where is your God? I said, we don't need to give you an answer. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire. And he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. But even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. And that's the key phrase here. I want you to understand, church. Remade, I need you to understand this. But even if he does not, because when it seems like he's not answering, that's where we have to decide, do we have faith in God's character, in his promises, or do we take control back? Because if we truly believe God is who he says he is, then if we don't understand it, it's just because we can't comprehend it, but we have to trust in his sovereign power and his will working through. And so they said, God can save us from this furnace, but even if he doesn't, and we die today, we're okay with that. And you see, that's where Romans 8:28 comes into play. I love how the Bible just interplays with itself. In early Old Testament, Daniel, we see it correlating with something written hundreds of years later in Romans, and they tie beautifully together. Romans 8:28 reads, we know all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. You see that, once again, there's a key phrase, for the good of. Often this has been misquoted. People say, all things work together for good. But it's for the good of. You know, cutting somebody open, exposing their insides, the risk of bleeding out and infection, it's not a good thing. We don't walk around taking a knife and saying, I wonder what my heart's doing today. Cut open and peel it back and look. No, people die doing that kind of crazy stuff. So surgery in that aspect isn't good. It's harming your body. But often surgery is for the good of the patient. If you've got cancer, you'd rather have a not good thing, harm to your body, be done, which causes a worse thing, cancer, to be removed. Because it's for your good, for the good of the patient. But once again, when it comes to God, it can't be 100% guaranteed. Now, it is, because he's promised it. But we as humans, because we don't understand God fully, and because we have fear, then it's not truly 100% guaranteed for us. But yet, our faith can keep us bolstered. Even when it doesn't seem like it's working, We can rely on Romans 8:28 because that's a promise of God. Because if we know God, we know his character, we know his promises and his power, we truly know him, then we can trust him. To say, even when I can't understand, even when I can't see you, God, when I don't feel you, I don't know you're there, I trust you. Because my heart is with you. I have put everything in your basket. You're my only hope for salvation. And I hope that you're working. Because God, I'm jumping, you're going to have to catch me. And that's how we develop faith. We have to know God. We have to look to scriptures, and we have to learn his promises in order to apply it to our lives. I have two more stories I want to close. Thank you so much for listening in. Thank you guys for being attentive and being patient this morning as we got started. The first is from the 1800s, and the second is from the Gospel of Mark. In the 1800s, there's a guy named Horatio Spafford. If you're a hymn or a history buff, you may have known that name. If you've been around the church scene for a while, especially in more traditional scenes, you probably know that name. You see, Horatio was a devoted Christ follower. He was friends with people like Dwight L. Moody and people that were big evangelists. So Horatio Spafford was a Christ follower and was devoted to God. Well, he was doing some mission work and he was doing some other things. And back in the 1800s, you couldn't just fly from one country to the other if you're crossing the ocean. You had to take a boat. And so he was doing some work. He had to finish some things from his house, and then he was going to send his family ahead of him and then meet them there later. And unfortunately, I'll make it short, the boat his family was on, it crashed and sank. And people were saved, but he got a telegram from his wife, and all it said was, "saved alone." He lost his 4 daughters. He had his wife. That was wonderful. But he lost his children. As the dad of a daughter, as a dad in general, I can't imagine the devastation of losing one, much less 4. So he's on his trip across the ocean to join his wife. And when they go through the spot, the captain comes to him and says, "Mr. Spafford, would you like to come up? We're passing through the spot where the ship sank and your family lost their life." And he said, "Sure." And he came up on deck and he surveyed the scene. And he was in devastation. His heart's breaking. And he's looking at this place where total devastation to his life happened. And then he pens a poem that later music was applied to. And the hymn, the famous hymn, "It Is Well," was created. And in that poem he says, "Even so, it is well with my soul." You see, he was looking at pain, he was looking at failure, and his life falling apart. And he said, "Even so, it's well with my soul." So church, what I'm asking for you today is to be able to have the faith that when things don't seem to be working, when you want the power and you don't seem to be getting anywhere, you say, "Even so, it's well with my soul." When the world crashes down around you, when you lose a loved one, when you lose your job, when it looks like your relationships are going under, and you're doing everything you can for God, you can say, "Even so, it is well with my soul," because God's still sovereign and he's in control. And the ability to be able to say that is you have to pray for faith. You have to ask for it. It has to be given to you. Which brings us to our last story, Mark chapter 9. I'm going to read the first part, and then we'll get to our key verse. Starting in verse 20 of Mark 9, it says, "So they brought a boy to him, and this boy was possessed, and these people were bringing it to Jesus. And when the spirit saw him, it immediately threw the boy into convulsions. He fell to the ground, rolled around, foaming at the mouth. 'How long has this been happening to him?' Jesus asked the boy's father. 'From childhood,' he said. 'And many times it has thrown him into fire or water to destroy him.'" I can imagine. What do you do with it as a father and you see your child possessed? And the demon possession is trying to kill your kid. What do? So he brings him to Jesus, and he says, the next part says, "But if you can do anything," he's talking to Jesus, "have compassion on us and help us." And then verse 23 says, Jesus said to him, "If you can?" There's a question. It's one of those, "Oh, ye little faith" moments. And then he says, "Everything is possible for the one who believes." And this is where a key verse, Mark 9:24, comes into play. It says, "Immediately the father of the boy cried out, 'I do believe. Help my unbelief.'" Church, I want this to be our cry. We do believe. Help our unbelief. Because with faith, we can move mountains. We can overcome fear. We can look at disaster and say, "It is well." Because prayer is the key. We can ask God, "Lord, help our unbelief." In just a moment, I want to pray, and we're going to close it up. If you're with your small group, don't let this conversation end. If you're not with a small group, but you're with friends or family, that's basically a small group. Don't let this conversation end today. Let this just the beginning of a lifelong conversation. Because I want you to start discussing, after the live stream comes down, amongst yourself, your own struggles and triumphs you've experienced in the arena of faith. Maybe today you can, as a group, decide to tackle this head on. You can look at life and say, together we're going to tackle the issue of faith because we want to be strong in our faith. We want to do more for God with our faith. We don't want to be shaken when hardships come. I want you to pray for each other as you pray for yourself that God will help your collective unbelief and open your eyes to his workings, to his power, and to understand that he is sovereign and that he is in control. Because once the fire of faith has been truly kindled, once it has been set alight and it's within your group, don't hold it back, because that's when you start seeing things happen inside the church. You see things happen in your group, in your family, inside the church, spreading to your community, spreading to the city, the county, and to the state and the world. That's how revival starts, is when people catch hold of the fire of God and they can't let it go and they don't hide it. They let their light shine to all men. So church, I pray that today we make a commitment to pray for God to help our unbelief, that we become bolder in our faith, bolder in our beliefs, that we let God take control of our lives because we want him to do the impossible through us. Thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate you. If you're given today, there should be a link added. You can go on Realm. You can go on our website. We do. I hate to say this because it feels like a televangelist, but I'm being honest here. We do need your support. If you're a regular giver, just because we're not here this week in person doesn't mean, like Eric's been saying, we don't have needs. We still have to pay the bill. And if this ministry needs to function, we rely on you. It's our faith in you that keeps this ministry going. So if you have a chance, please donate. But above all that, I'd rather you focus on faith, because that's where my heart is for you, more than just focusing on finances. Church, I want you to understand this. All right, let's pray together. Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to do this remotely, even when we're unable to get together. Lord, we were faced with many hardships today, but I believe that you are sovereign and still in control, and that in spite of the difficulties, those that needed to hear this have, or those that need to will, because this will be archived, this will be shared, this will be there on the internet for all to see if they can find it. So God, I pray that you use Remade to start a revolution of faith, that we no longer just become passerbys in the Christian walk, but that we truly become active participants through the use of faith, that we allow you to control us, to do crazy things that are uncomfortable and out of the norm, that we break boundaries, Lord. I heard a statement one time that if you aren't making the pious uncomfortable, you're probably not doing Christianity right. See, that's what Christ did. So, God, we're trying to emulate that. So, God, help us today to go forth and not let this slip out of our minds. Help this to be a jumping off point for many great things for your kingdom. Lord, I have a passion. We at Remade have a passion to see those that attend find you, to experience life change and grow in full Christian maturity so they can help others do the same. Lord, thank you for your love. Thank you for your Son. Thank you for salvation. And thank you for giving us the faith to believe in it. And all this we ask in your name we pray. Amen.